Hi guys, Olive here. Here today with the next installment in my ongoing series of videos all about the 90s PBS Kids TV show Wishbone. In these videos, I watch one episode of the show and compare it against the work of literature that episode takes on. And in today's video, I will be looking at an episode that happened right in the middle of the first season called A Tale of Two Sitters, which surprisingly takes on A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens. So let's dive in. What's the story, Wishbone?
What's the story, Wishbone?
It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. With such an iconic opening line, of course Wishbone references it right at the beginning of the episode, but also, of course, he's not talking about the French Revolution. He's excited because his human, Joe, and his friend, David, are supposed to hang out and test out this really cool remote control car that David just got. But when David arrives, he does so with a posse. He has to babysit the two kids he brought along with him, and he wants Joe to help. And thus, for those kids anyway, it was the worst of times. We're then introduced to Wishbone's character in the novel section. He is playing Charles Evrémonde, also known as Darnay, who is completely fed up with his family's behavior in Paris. So he decides to leave the city and start a new life in London. We see him with his beautiful wife Lucy in London when he receives a letter from a longtime and faithful servant to the Evrémonde family saying that he had been captured by revolutionaries and would likely be killed if someone didn't intervene. And being a good man, Charles Darnay, at this point, decides to return to Paris to rescue him. Immediately before this, we're told that things in Paris are getting pretty bad. And in order to illustrate that point, they do show some physical violence. It's not too extreme, except they do show a Molotov cocktail at one point, and I'm assuming kids will only know what that is if they've played video games before. Meanwhile, the real-life Wishbone desperately wants to be involved in this remote control car test run, but instead he keeps getting locked inside the house, spending time with the two kids David is supposed to be babysitting. They didn't want to come outside for some reason. So he is held captive, much in the same way that Darnay is, because he is arrested upon his arrival in Paris for his family connection to the Evrémonde family, the exact same family that he left Paris to distance himself from. And in both situations, we see the young kids in the house and the Parisians in Paris making a complete mess of the place. And in the real life storyline, the kids are able to get away with this because they've been left completely unattended in the house with no one but Wishbone as their chaperone. Darnay is put on trial for the sins of his family and is condemned to death. Meanwhile, in the modern day section, Joe's mom comes home to find the house completely destroyed and initially blames Wishbone. Is there no justice? Eventually, both sides reach a positive conclusion, but unlike in other episodes, I felt the link between the two stories was pretty weak. It seems like the common bottom line they both were going for was, being falsely accused feels lousy, but having an outside individual show bravery and sacrifice themselves for you is pretty great. I have said before in these episodes that I normally feel that there's a moral message that they're trying to communicate to the young audience, but in this one, I didn't feel that there was one. I just recently got done reading this book for the very first time, and before I even watched this episode, it seemed like an odd choice for a Wishbone adaptation. I mean, Dickens wrote many novels, and you had to choose the one where a head removal device is personified and romanticized. Speaking of which, I was so surprised that they actually showed the guillotine. I mean, granted, the only heads they were chopping up were those of cabbage, but still, that's a huge thing to present on an episode of children's television. But that's kind of the problem with this adaptation, is that this book is extremely grown up, to say the least. There is layered societal criticism. There's complex imagery the entire way through, and there are these huge moral questions being asked of you as the reader. And so I don't think something like that can be playfully mirrored in a storyline about babysitting. And that's made pretty apparent in how much of the novel they choose not to show in the episode. For instance, Lucy and Darnay are just shown as a happily married couple. There's no talk of her father's imprisonment, her father coming back to life after his imprisonment. There's no talk about Darnay's trial for treason. The episode is effectively missing the first half of the novel, and that's something you can feel if you've read the book. I do need to take a moment to commend the way they handled Madame Defarge, because as much as they don't explain why she hates the Evrémonde family so much, which is something they could not have explained, that is far too much for kids. I do think the actress who portrayed her was extremely powerful. I think they really got across her revolutionary fervor as much as they could in a kids show, and they even showed her knitting, which is one of the most important and unsettling things about her character. I really think they got her right. But overall, I think this book is way too big concept-wise to present to kids. And being a woman now in her 30s who read this for the first time, I was flabbergasted that this is a book that we put in front of high schoolers to read. I'm not saying that high schoolers lack the intellectual maturity to take this on, but I think this book demands a mature, experienced reader, someone who has read a lot of other books very closely. To fully understand this novel, I found it a struggle at times. I sort of get the feeling that this is a situation where the title came first and then the planning for the episode came second, because I fully admit A Tale of Two Sitters is a fabulous title. But unfortunately, the content didn't follow. So that's it for this installment of What's the Story, Wishbone. I am really hoping and have every confidence that the next episode I take on will be much better. Most of them are fantastic. If you have any comments or questions about anything you've seen in this video or about anything in general, I would love to hear from you in the comment section below, but you can also find me on a variety of different places on social media, and the links to all of my profiles will be in the description box below. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you're having a wonderful day, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.